The grand lobby of the L'Etoile Grand Hotel was Sandra's kingdom. From her polished mahogany throne behind the senior concierge desk, she surveyed the hushed opulence, the soaring marble columns that disappeared into a frescoed ceiling, the crystal chandelier that dripped light like frozen diamonds, the quiet ballet of bellhops and guests gliding across floors that mirrored the splendor above. For 8 years she had been a guardian of this gilded cage, a fierce protector of its serene, exclusive atmosphere. Sandra believed her role was more than just booking dinner reservations or arranging private car services. She was a cultural sentinel. In her mind, the L'Etoile wasn't just a hotel. It was a sanctuary from the vulgarity of the outside world, a bastion of decorum and tradition. A tradition she felt was under constant assault. Her online life was a testament to this belief, a carefully curated echo chamber of articles, podcasts, and forums that confirmed her deepest conviction. The world was engaged in a vicious cultural war, and she was on the front lines. Every day was a new battle, and her desk was her trench. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when the enemy walked through the revolving glass doors. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, with a shock of silver hair and a face etched with the fine lines of a life lived thoughtfully. He was dressed in a simple, well-worn tweed jacket, grey trousers, and comfortable-looking leather shoes, understated, almost forgettable, amidst the lobby's parade of designer labels and bespoke suits. But it wasn't his clothing that seized Sandra's attention. It was the hat. Perched on his head was a simple, dark blue baseball cap. Embroidered on the front in clean, white block letters was a single word: vote. Sandra's blood ran cold, then hot. The color, the simplicity. It was them. It had to be. In her world, everything was a signal, a dog whistle. That particular shade of blue, combined with the sanctimonious "get out the vote" messaging, was a clear emblem of the political party she despised. To her, it wasn't an encouragement of civic duty. It was a Trojan horse, a smug, passive-aggressive declaration of allegiance smuggled into her sanctuary. It was an act of aggression. Her fingers tightened on the smooth surface of the desk. The man ambled over, not to her, but to a plush armchair near the fireplace, where he sat and pulled a worn paperback from his jacket pocket. He was just going to sit there, polluting her pristine lobby with his political filth. A hot flush of indignation crept up her neck. This was a test. The universe was testing her resolve. Not on my watch, she thought, a venomous certainty solidifying in her gut. She straightened her uniform jacket, the gold nameplate reading Sandra, Senior Concierge, glinting under the chandelier. She felt a surge of power, of righteousness. She was doing this for the hotel, for the decent, respectable guests who shouldn't have to be subjected to such provocative displays. She strode across the marble floor, her sensible heels clicking with purpose. As she approached, the man looked up from his book, a pair of intelligent, calm eyes meeting hers over the rim of his reading glasses. He offered a polite, unassuming smile. "Excuse me, sir," Sandra began, her voice a carefully calibrated instrument of condescending authority. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to remove your hat." The man's smile didn't falter. "Oh? Is there a no-hats rule indoors?" "I apologize. I must have missed the sign." He made a motion to take it off. "It's not just any hat, sir," Sandra pressed on, her self-righteousness overriding the easy compliance. She needed to make the point. "Our hotel maintains a strictly apolitical environment to ensure the comfort of all our guests. We have a policy against overt political messaging and paraphernalia." "Eh?" The man paused, his hand hovering over the brim. He looked down at the simple white letters. "Vote?" he asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice. "This is political messaging? I thought it was just a civic encouragement. It doesn't endorse a candidate or a party." "Sir, we both know what that hat represents," Sandra said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hiss, as if they were allies in this charade. "That specific color, that slogan, it's a symbol, and it's making other guests uncomfortable." She gestured vaguely towards a couple checking in on the far side of the lobby, who were completely oblivious. The man's calm composure was beginning to irritate her. It felt like mockery. He wasn't arguing. He was questioning her premise with a serene logic, that felt more insulting than a shouted retort. "With all due respect, young lady," the man said, his voice still gentle but now laced with a thread of steel, "I think you're making an assumption, a rather large one. The only person who seems uncomfortable here is you." The quiet challenge set Sandra's teeth on edge. How dare he? She was the authority here. She was protecting the sanctity of the L'Etoile. "Sir, the policy is the policy," she snapped, her professional veneer cracking. "You can either remove the hat, or I will have to ask you to leave the premises." The man slowly shook his head, a flicker of something disappointment, perhaps in his eyes. "I don't believe that is a real policy. I believe it is a policy you have just invented, and I would caution you, very strongly, to reconsider this course of action. You are making a significant mistake." His warning, delivered with such quiet confidence, should have given her pause. It should have been a red flag. But to Sandra it sounded like a threat from a common troublemaker trying to bluff his way out of being disciplined. The injustice of it all, that he could be so wrong and yet so arrogant, stoked her fury into a blazing inferno. "A mistake?" she scoffed, her voice rising in pitch. Heads were starting to turn. "The only mistake here, sir, was you bringing your political propaganda into a private establishment. I am asking you one last time to leave. If you refuse, you will be trespassing." The man sighed, a deep, weary sound. He closed his book, marking his page with a finger, and looked at her directly. The calmness in his eyes had not wavered, but it had changed. It was no longer patient. It was observational, analytical, like a scientist studying a specimen. "Very well," he said softly. "Do what you feel you must." That was it. The final provocation. He was calling her bluff. Swelling with a sense of righteous purpose, Sandra turned on her heel, marched back to her desk, and picked up the phone. Her hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with adrenaline. "Security to the main lobby," she said into the receiver, her voice loud enough for the man to hear. "We have a trespasser who is refusing to leave." She hung up, and then, for good measure, she pulled out her personal cell phone. She was going to follow protocol, her own protocol. She dialed 911. "Yes, I'd like to report a man at the L'Etoile Grand Hotel," she said, her voice dripping with dramatic urgency. "He's causing a disturbance, refusing to comply with our policies. I believe he's trespassing." A small crowd of guests had now gathered at a distance, their murmurs a low hum in the vast space. 2 security guards, burly men in sharp black suits, arrived within a minute. They approached Sandra, their faces stern. "That's him," she said, pointing a triumphant finger at the man in the chair, who was now just sitting patiently, watching the scene unfold as if it were a play. "The man in the blue hat. He needs to be removed." As the guards began to walk towards him, the main hotel entrance spun open with a frantic energy. A man in a flawlessly tailored suit, his face pale with panic, practically sprinted into the lobby. It was Mr. Dubois, the general manager. His eyes darted around, wide with terror, before they locked onto the scene by the fireplace. "No, no, no, no!" he gasped, rushing forward and waving his hands at the security guards. "Stop! Stand down!" The guards halted, confused. Sandra watched, a frown creasing her brow. What was Dubois doing, undermining her authority? Mr. Dubois didn't even glance at Sandra. He skidded to a halt before the man in the chair, his posture immediately transforming from one of frantic command to one of utter subservience. He bowed his head slightly, his hands clasped before him as if in prayer. "Mr. Sterling," he breathed, his voice trembling, "my deepest, most profound apologies. I am so sorry. I was in a meeting on the penthouse level, and my phone was off. I just got the alert. I can't imagine. Please forgive this appalling misunderstanding." Sandra's triumphant smirk froze on her face. Sterling? The name echoed in her mind. Arthur Sterling. It wasn't just a familiar name, it was a legendary one. Arthur Sterling was not just some wealthy guest. He wasn't even just on the board. He was the founder and majority owner of Sterling Hospitality Group, the international conglomerate that owned the L'Etoile and 200 other luxury properties across the globe. He was a titan of industry, a celebrated philanthropist, and arguably the most powerful and influential private citizen in the entire state, a man who had governors and senators on speed dial. The blood drained from Sandra's face. The solid ground of her self-righteousness had just turned to quicksand. The man, Mr. Sterling, finally stood up. He placed his book on the chair and looked at the utterly mortified Mr. Dubois. His expression was not angry. It was far worse. It was weary, like a king surveying a failing part of his kingdom. "It's all right, Jean-Pierre," he said, his voice carrying easily across the now silent lobby. "It is not your fault. It appears we have a systemic failure in our training protocols. An employee who feels empowered to invent policy based on personal political bias and then attempts to eject a guest, any guest, is a catastrophic liability." He then turned his calm, assessing gaze onto Sandra. Every ounce of her previous fury had curdled into a cold, paralyzing dread. She felt small, exposed, her entire world shrinking to the space between her and the man she had just tried to have arrested. "You," Mr. Sterling said, his voice devoid of heat, yet heavier than any shout. "What is your name?" "Sandra," she stammered, her own name tasting like ash in her mouth. "Sandra," he repeated, nodding slowly. "You have worked for my company for 8 years. In all that time, have you ever once read our mission statement? It speaks of unconditional hospitality, of creating a sanctuary for all, regardless of background or belief, of service, not judgment." He took a step closer. "You saw a hat with the word vote on it, and you built a fantasy of political persecution in your head. You appointed yourself judge, jury, and executioner. You harassed a guest. You humiliated yourself and this fine establishment. You escalated a situation of your own making to the point of calling law enforcement." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle into the suffocating silence of the lobby. "You are the very antithesis of what the L'Étoile stands for. You are a poison in the bloodstream of this organization." He looked past her to Mr. Dubois. "Jean-Pierre, her employment with Sterling Hospitality is terminated. Effective immediately. Have security escort her out. Not as a trespasser, but as a former employee who has forgotten the most basic principle of her profession. Humanity." The words hit Sandra with the force of a physical blow. Fired. On the spot. In front of everyone. By the founder of the company. It was a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. The world tilted on its axis, the beautiful lobby blurring into a smear of gold and white. As the same security guards she had summoned now moved to flank her, she looked down at Mr. Sterling's hat, which he had finally removed and held in his hands. It was just a hat, a simple blue hat, its color no more significant than the color of the sky. The word vote stared back at her, no longer a symbol of her enemy, but a testament to her own spectacular, world-shattering foolishness. Escorted out through the same revolving doors that her victim had entered, Sandra was met not with the sanctum of her office, but the indifferent bustle of the city street. Stripped of her uniform, her name tag, and her misplaced righteousness, she was just another person on the pavement, a stark and immediate lesson learned. In the real world, the castles we build in our minds offer no protection from the consequences of our actions. The words hit Sandra with the force of a physical blow. Fired. On the spot. In front of everyone. By the founder of the company. It was a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. The world tilted on its axis, the beautiful lobby blurring into a smear of gold and white. As the same security guards she had summoned now moved to flank her, she looked down at Mr. Sterling's hat, which he had finally removed and held in his hands. It was just a hat, a simple blue hat, its color no more significant than the color of the sky. The word vote stared back at her, no longer a symbol of her enemy, but a testament to her own spectacular, world-shattering foolishness. Escorted out through the same revolving doors that her victim had entered, Sandra was met not with the sanctum of her office, but the indifferent bustle of the city street. Stripped of her uniform, her name tag, and her misplaced righteousness, she was just another person on the pavement, a stark and immediate lesson learned. In the real world, the castles we build in our minds offer no protection from the consequences of our actions.